Guten Tag, it's me, WNT. Astgenne the Lightchaser is as interesting as she is perplexing. I've seen a lot of criticisms of her, and it seems like the consensus is that she's another Blessing or Vigil. But, as someone with an M9 Mod 6 Blessing, I don't think that's a terrible thing to be. No, she's not meta or anything, but she's perfectly effective and plenty rewarding for those who want to play around her quirks. If you're just looking to hear if she's a must build or anything, let me get that out of the way. No, not really. She's better than people give her credit for, and when used properly, her fragile plus the damage redirect on her S3 can about match the damage amplification of Suzerain's S3, depending on mods and potentials, on a much quicker rotation, and while doing some alright damage herself. While no, she doesn't beat a much older unit outright, I think that's more so because they realize that that's a lot of damage amplification to begin with, and that it's maybe not a good idea to be drastically increasing that ceiling given how far the damage cap has come, rather than them just wanting to make her bad. However, her damage amp is a lot more limited and conditional upon you working around her quirks, so if you're just looking for a no-brainer plug-and-play unit to go along with your Wishadel and Exualt, you're probably better off looking elsewhere. But if you're the kind of player that likes units that require thought and setup and a deeper understanding of their kits, there's a lot to unpack here. And what's more is that she seems tailor-made to specifically pair with the sort of units that this kind of player might enjoy. Even if, as someone not looking for her to be meta, I still have criticisms of her kit. But I'm going to try to balance those with what I find compelling about her, and why actually me getting her to M6 did not break my account, thank you very much.
I'll do my best.
Astgenne is a Decel Binder, aka a slow supporter, whose attacks inflict a debuff that reduces enemy movement speed by 80%. And she's the first 6-star in this subclass in years, going all the way back to Suzerain launching with Twilight of Volamonda. Astgenne Alter's first talent increases her attack speed by 1 every time she inflicts slow on an enemy, stacking up to 18 times, and lasting as long as she's deployed. For starters, this is a fun nod to her non-alter form, as she has a similar stacking attack speed talent there, but it's also just a nice thing to have as a Decel Binder. Her subclass's slow lasts 0.8 seconds, and with no modifiers, they have a 1.9 second attack interval. This means that while they can still offer some crowd control off skill, their coverage on that slow is less than 50% on a single target. Because that enemy can then immediately go back to their full speed after that 0.8 seconds is over, this means that, again with no modifiers, when you account for the time the enemy is just walking between slows, Decel Binders effectively only slow an enemy by 33.7% off skill. Not nothing for sure, but definitely not the highest value on its own. This extra attack speed helps improve that percentage, bringing it up to an effective 39.7% slow. This isn't a massive change, admittedly, but does combine with her mod nicely. That mod's base effect increases the slow duration from each attack up to 1.2 seconds, and the talent change increases the attack speed stacks up to 23, and once at max stacks, she gains 12% attack. Just the trait change alone goes a long way to increasing her slow coverage, bringing that up to 74.5%, and her effective slow up to 59.6%, with the talent upgrade that comes from leveling the mod bringing her up to 77.7% coverage and a 62.1% effective slow. Now, I just threw a lot of numbers at you, but to remind you where things started, the talent and mod take her from the 33.7% effective slow that Decel Binders have at base to 62.1%. I will say that the extra 5 attack speed does not make all that much of a difference on this front, but her S2 is an attack recovery skill, so if you want to use that, you might consider it anyway. And part of the draw of her S3 is her doing damage, so the extra attack speed plus the extra attack once that's maxed out can also benefit her there. For my part, I definitely wanted mod level 1, but was okay leaving her there. This does immediately help to set her apart from the other 6-star Decel Binders, as Angelina doesn't attack off skill at all on S2 or S3, and Suzerain doesn't get this extra attack speed to increase that coverage. And as we'll see when we go over her skills, her S2 goes even further to make her the best option for consistent multi-target slows across the subclass. However, I do think that they could have gone a bit further with the attack speed they gave her, especially with her mod. Astgenne's second talent inflicts a 12% fragile on enemies, increasing up to 16% once they've been in her range for 7 seconds. Though notably that does reset back to the base 12% if they leave her range and re-enter it later. Now I think this is a big part of the complaints against her, because if you're even a little bit familiar with Decel Binders, this probably sounds familiar. Yes, Suzerain, who I will remind you released 5.5 years ago, has a talent that inflicts a 23% fragile on slowed enemies in her range. Now, I will again point out that their S3s actually do have comparable damage amp, because of the way that Astgenne layers in a whole other multiplicative increase alongside this, so I do think that this is perhaps a bit overblown. However, I will absolutely see that this just doesn't look good. In a game where each new gacha 6-star has something new and flashy and obviously good, giving her a talent that just looks like such a downgrade really drives home the difference in philosophy in how they design gacha units and their welfare counterparts. However, this talent still has some things going for it. While I'll wait to get into the depths of picking apart how it works with her S3 until we've actually gone over that skill, there's still a fair bit to like beyond that. For one, while she does still have a condition to reach that max value on that fragile, it affecting all enemies in range is quite nice. When you consider her subclass's unique range, it's not too hard for her to cover 2 or 3 lanes at once, amplifying your damage across all simultaneously, even off skill. Another benefit is how it specifically works with blockers. One of the weaknesses of this subclass is that while their slow is a very strong status effect, it stops being relevant the second the enemies stop moving. So once they reach your blockers, your Decel Binders won't be offering all that much. Her S2 has a really neat way around this, which we'll get to, but this talent also ensures that she can still play quite nicely with blockers, as when her slow may no longer do anything, her talent triggers that extra condition to increase her contribution in other ways. This results in her ultimately being a pretty flexible pick and maybe the easiest Decel Binder to slot into daily play, while also still having mechanical depth in her skills to keep her engaging to more advanced players. So yes, the comparative value of the talent is confusing, and while I don't think they had to outdo Suzerain's Fragile outright, I don't know how they expected people to react when they saw this. But it still has unique value to bring to those who can look past that.
Let me set my alarm.
Astgenne's S1 doubles her attack and lets those attacks chain across up to 4 enemies. You know, like a chaincaster. Like 5-star Astgenne. I wouldn't necessarily say that this is an upgrade over chaincasters, let alone a skill that replaces them entirely. And it's honestly the last skill that I'd recommend for her, but it is a really interesting side grade to that subclass that's worth considering. The obvious advantage that chaincasters have is that their attacks chain even off of their skills, allowing them to continue to provide multi-target crowd control and damage whether or not their skill is up. Plus, their default range extends further ahead by a tile, letting their chaining attacks reach enemies that Astgenne's can't. However, Astgenne has a number of advantages of her own. For one, she costs only 15 DP, which is less than half of what she costs as a 5-star. What's more is that her slow uptime is way better. At base, the slow from chaincasters only lasts 0.5 seconds to Decel Binders 0.8, and they have a slower attack interval at 2.3 seconds versus the Decel Binders 1.9. The Chaincaster X mod branch does increase that slow duration to 0.8 seconds. However, like we covered, Astgenne has the Decel Binder mod Y again, which brings her slow to 1.2 seconds, and she still has a faster attack interval. In fact, even with Passenger's S2 decreasing his attack interval by 50%, and assuming he has the mod X equipped to extend the slow and give him a bit of attack speed from the base stats, she still has better slow coverage on this skill. As for damage, it's not exactly going to be solo carrying you through maps, but with it doubling her attack, she'll still be able to contribute nicely. Like I said, it's still not necessarily the skill I'd recommend for her, but I do like that they actually did something fun here. Too often, 6-star S1s are just throwaway things that honestly might as well not exist for how rarely they'll get used, but they actually did something with a bit of personality here. I will also add that if you do plan on using it regularly, you definitely want to give it masteries. Again, not her main skill or anything, so most people can skip that, but they give it a pretty massive improvement on its uptime, not to mention a substantial damage increase, so it'll just feel a lot worse at skill level 7. Astgenne's S2 is also very Chaincaster-like, and also kind of the main reason I'd recommend holding off on her S1. Like I said, her S1 is interesting and definitely has its uses, but this is also kind of that idea of what if a Decile Binder was also a Chaincaster, but more unique and useful. Every 4th attack hits 2 enemies in her range furthest from the blue box, dealing extra arts damage as a percentage of her attack, slowing them for 3 seconds, and linking up to 3 targets around those enemies and pulling them back towards the initial targets. This is also her offensive recovery skill, so again, if you're considering those extra mod levels, this is where you'd feel that extra attack speed the most. Anyway, the idea behind this skill is pretty clear. Her normal attacks slow the enemies closest to the blue box, keeping them from reaching it. And then the skill attaches them to the enemies furthest away from it, pulling them back and repeating constantly to keep them from ever reaching where they're going. Given that it only has a 3 SP cost, this makes it far and away the best consistent slow skill from a Decile Binder. I mean, Angie only attacks on skill with her 2 main skills, and even once charging up S2, Suzu still only attacks 3 targets compared to this skill's 8, and contains no increase to the slow duration or increase to attack speed to bridge the gap, even ignoring the shift effect that Astgenne's S2 has going for it. Now, much like her S1, this also really wants masteries, but in maybe the weirdest way I've ever seen for a skill. Like, the masteries don't do so much for the skill's damage, but they each change how the skill works on a fundamental level, starting at M1. So, you know how I said the skill chains off 2 targets? Well, not at skill level 7. M1 lets it go from targeting 1 enemy to targeting 2, immediately doubling its effectiveness. M2 is a bit more what you'd expect, bringing the SP cost down from 4 to 3. That's still a big deal though, especially since this is an offensive recovery skill, and that reduction is massive for keeping the skill going. And then M3. Well, M1 doubled the main targets, and now her M3 lets those chains hit 1 additional enemy, letting them branch out up to 3 enemies beyond the main targets. So, to put this in some perspective, at skill level 7, this skill hits 3 enemies. At M3, it can hit 8 on a 25% faster cooldown. And sure, doing some more damage while we're at it, because why not? To put this in scale with the broader game, most of the time with 6-star masteries, you'll see about a 20 to 25% damage increase with a bit of a rotation improvement. While the single target damage from this skill only improves by 11.5% with masteries, the SP boost alone being a 25% improvement would already be notable. And then the target count increases by 167%. Yeah, over 2.5 times more targets than at skill level 7. I cannot stress enough that this is just a completely different skill at M3. But how does it actually play? This skill has great multi-target, and with the extended slow, really nice uptime. And like I said, it can be really effective at not only slowing targets, but stopping them from advancing entirely. But I think my favorite thing about this skill is how it shows how much their understanding of the archetype has evolved since the previous 6 stars. See, slow is a very good status. And like I talked about in my Tragodia guide, reducing enemy movement speed by that much can massively reduce the DPS requirements to take out dangerous enemies. But the problem that slow has specifically is that it's still very finite in what it can do. Because even if it's a lot slower, they will keep moving. And when they reach your blockers, well, you can't reduce their movement speed once they're standing still. While I already talked about how her second talent can still contribute when that happens, this skill seeks to get around that limitation altogether. By adding the shift to this, it can let you pull those enemies back and slow them all over again, reducing pressure on blockers and giving you more of a window to take out those enemies. This is a fantastic idea, and can make for a really fun skill, and is great for big rushes of small enemies where the threat isn't so much any individual enemy, but rather their combined numbers and speed overwhelming your blockers and slipping through. However, I have to talk about that pull force. For all the massive improvements that her masteries give, she never gets the one thing she'd want the most, as the moment she hits skill level 7, the pull force caps at 1. This is, unfortunately, a significant limitation on what the skill can do. Like I said, it is fantastic for ragdolling your run-of-the-mill trash mobs that don't weigh anything anyway, and can single-handedly corral some pretty dense rushes that might otherwise overwhelm your blockers. But the second there's a more dangerous enemy, it can't do much more than tickle them. And yeah, once they're blocked, it can still interrupt enemy attacks, so that's nice I guess, and still more utility than a normal slow would have on a blocked enemy, but a far cry from the skill's full potential. And in a game with infinite Tragodia and Nymph stalls, limiting her like this feels frustrating, especially since it's not like this would have brought her to their level, or that of actual shifters for that matter. For a long time, I've seen people suggest that most welfare 6 stars feel like upscaled 5 stars rather than actual 6 stars. And while I don't agree with this statement, and it would take a full video of its own to unpack this in depth, I get where they're coming from. Whether you like them or not, they just don't give them nearly as much to work with as they do Gacha 6 stars. Especially recent Gacha 6 stars. But Astgenne feels like the opposite of this. Instead of scaling up a 5-star kit, it feels like they designed a really cool 6-star kit, and then walked it back just a little bit. And while I don't think she would necessarily have been meta either way, that just makes it feel worse to me. If she was always going to be a fun unit for creative players, why restrict her creative options like this? Anyway, this is something that I'll return to as we talk about her S3, as we unfortunately have a bit more to talk about with that one, but it really starts to come into focus with the Shift Force. They had a really cool idea, and one that has a really creative way to work around the limitations of the subclass, and then walked it back so that it doesn't have nearly enough pull force to truly let it shine. Anyway, venting aside, I do think this is still a good skill, and a really fun one at that. Shift skills in general are just really great, and it never gets old seeing your units zip enemies around like that. And whenever they drop another map or mechanic that throws a million trash mobs at you at once, or a bunch of garbage targetables to confuse your operator's targeting, you'll be glad that you have it. And that's still a good niche to have. I think the most frustrating way to lose a stage isn't when I fail to take out a boss, it's when there's just so much going on that I lose track of some trash mobs and a dog slips through. So a unit that can specifically prevent that and can do so in a really unique and fun way, while also providing a fragile effect and slow to help you take out the bigger threats, is still very valuable. Plus, this skill is incredible in IS. Like, okay, it's not going to be your meta nuke option or whatever, but from the ways you have to decrease enemy weight between Angelina, Hool, and a number of relics, to ways of increasing her SP recovery, she is maybe the most fun unit I've brought to that mode in a long time. Just everything getting permanently ragdolled like a dead Dark Souls enemy or something. Genuinely incredible stuff. Like, I talk about skills being fun a lot on my channel, but it's not often that they make me actually laugh out loud like I did with this one. So, despite my frustrations with how they balanced it, personally, I'm still very glad I invested in it. Anyway, before we move on, if you're enjoying the video so far, consider subscribing. It really helps me out. But, on to S3. Astgenne alters S3 expands her range, increases her attack, decreases her attack interval, and targets 2 specific enemies that she will chain together, and each of those enemies will receive 25% of the arts damage dealt to the other as extra damage. And during the skill, she will only attack the chained enemies and will not switch the chains until one of the units is defeated or leaves her range. This skill also has a lot to like about it. It also gets weird, but well, let's cover the good stuff first. For one, even before you get into her synergizing with other units, it just works really nicely with her own kit. Increasing her range lets her apply her fragile to more enemies and makes it easier for them to stay in her range for long enough to trigger that extra effect. The reduced attack interval is multiplicative with her talent attack speed, making sure you feel the full effect of both, which increases her own damage nicely and gets her to 100% slow uptime with her mod, and very close to it without it. but the way that she does this damage amplification is as unique as it is potent, and has a number of ways that it can be applied. For one, it can give a single target DPS unit effective multi-target, letting them clear out waves that they would not have been able to manage on their own. But by far the strongest way to use it is by adding a unit that can target both chained enemies, allowing you to benefit from the damage amplification on both. Because if you set her up right, you have her 16% fragile and what is essentially another 25% multiplicative damage amp, which combined work out to a 45% damage amp. With her fragile mod, Suzu hits 44%, and while Suzu affects all targets in range, Astgenne also contributes damage on her own. It is, in effect, a really interesting combination of what you get from both Suzerain and Angelina. It has Angie's S3 range, and actually lets her do decent damage herself, also with a pretty quick rotation, but while still having Suzu's emphasis on damage amplification. This is really good. I'm going to again kind of nitpick at it, but I want you to remember through all of this that it has a lot of potential and can be massive if you know how to use it. But the problem rests in its application. Because again, it really feels like they realized how potent it could be and wanted to make sure it didn't get out of hand. And that's fair. You have to balance the game somehow, and I don't actually think it'd be a good idea to give out a free Wieshadel every event. But there's balancing numbers, and then there's, well, this. So my initial description of Astgenne's skill 3 was a simplification. Don't worry, I gave you all that it tells you directly in-game, but there's a lot that isn't covered through the in-game text. To start, how is that damage calculated? It redirects 25% of incoming arts damage. You'd think that would at least be straightforward, right? Look at how much damage a unit is dealing to the first enemy and the second takes 25% of that, right? Nope, that would be too easy. Instead, it cuts off the damage calculation early, before applying res and before applying any damage amplifications. On the surface, this isn't a bad idea. I mean, if it were affected by res, the transfer would end up being hit by both enemies' res, which, at its current numbers, would leave it doing almost nothing most of the time. However, it's the second part that really stings. Because not using damage amps means that, well, for starters, her own fragile effect doesn't get to double dip here. But beyond that, it really limits her options when you want to pair her with another unit, which is the whole point of a damage amplifier like her in the first place. In fact, even res not applying limits her ceiling. If it applied twice, that would mean that res debuffing would apply twice as well, which would massively boost the value of someone like Ifrit, and would give creative players avenues to really push Astgenne to her limits. There's still definitely value in using a debuffer, but not nearly as much as there could have been. And another fact that the game doesn't directly tell you, because the damage that's transferred comes from Astgenne, not the original unit, it also misses out on a lot more besides. From res ignore to elemental damage to personal damage amplification talents, not to mention the fact that it only transfers arts damage, so any kind of mixed damage option is out the window. The end result is that most popular DPS units don't even work with her very well at all. Like, let's try to find her ideal 6-star partner. First of all physical, mixed, true, or elemental damage units are out. That doesn't transfer. Next, you have to be multi-target so that you can hit both chained enemies. So, out you go, single target options. And splash casters, unless you can hit 2 enemies directly, get out. I can't guarantee that the targets will be right next to each other. Next, out with personal res ignore or damage amplification talents or skills that won't apply to the damage transferred from Astgenne. So, who are we left with? This already eliminates a lot of your go-to units, but even beyond that, not all of these are perfect fits. How many of these units have skill cycles that are at least close-ish to lining up with Astgenne's? Which of these will reliably target the exact 2 enemies that are chained? When I first saw this, I was frustrated. It makes her look like a unit that, on the surface, begs for creative synergies and strategizing, but when you get into her kit, restricts your options in a way that I can only compare to how people seem to think primal casters work. However, I think the story here isn't who can't work with her, but who can. While it's pretty restrictive in terms of application with most popular or meta 6 stars, those aren't the only units in the game. In fact, if you're a 5-star enjoyer like I am, Astgenne might be your favorite 6-star. Because while she doesn't pair well with innate Resignor or elemental damage or personal damage amplifications or stuff like that, those are also things that they just don't tend to give to 5 stars in the first place. Because of this, the limitations on 5-star kits and the limitations on her kit kind of cancel out in a weird way, to ultimately be a lot more flexible and genuinely give you some really refreshing options. And this is on top of her skill working quite well with a number of off-meta 6 stars as well. To me, this is really what brings her kit into focus, because while she doesn't necessarily line up with what you'd expect from a meta unit, that's not who she's for. She's for the kind of players that are going to be bringing off-meta picks anyway. While she can still, at minimum, contribute something nice to anyone who brings her along, it's people like me who think about how she'd work with Accord S2 or Hool S3 who will ultimately get the most enjoyment out of her. And I think for players like us, the restrictions on her skill 3 will be much less pronounced. While yes, she could absolutely have offered more creative options with buffing and debuffing that would have made this demographic happy, in the end, the kind of players who get excited about weird 6-star welfares are still going to have a good time with her. And besides, if that's not your speed, there is still hope for her still. After all, her first mod affects her attack speed talent, not her fragile one. While increasing the fragile won't completely eliminate all issues with the skill, it will increase the payoff from using it as well. And that's notable. Plus, as much as people rag on this skill, it's still a 45% damage amp, so it's not like the payoff is non-existent as is. But as for her kit, how would I rate it overall? Well, using my patented fun, useful chart, let's see where I put her. For useful, I'd have to put her slightly above the x-axis, as that's kind of where I think she'll be on average. Both her S2 and S3 are very map, enemy, ally dependent, and she can be anywhere from the crux of your clear to just moderately handy. Never totally useless, but it can really go either way, so I'm just going to have to put her in the middle of that range. For fun, despite my criticisms of her kit's execution, I still think there's a lot to like. She provides a very unique way of managing large crowds, and might be my personal favorite solution for that. And in IS can be a really fun option on a supporter voucher for those wanting to look past Radiant and Tragodia. Meanwhile, her S3 can open up new avenues for creative players looking for non-meta arts DPS options, notably including multiple 4 or 5-star operators. Ultimately, the limitations on both main skills prevent me from giving her a perfect score in that regard, but she still does quite well there. But kit analysis aside, before I wrap up, there's another reason to be excited about her that I want to talk about. While a lot has been made of a certain double altar released on CN, with there being plenty of speculation about who might be getting one next, the thing that's been far more interesting to me is just what Astgenne opens up. While yes, she's the first altar of a welfare operator, which is itself significant, she's also by far the most recently released unit to get one. Before her, the latest releasing operator to get an altar was Thorns, who dropped during the Docilis rerun in August 2020, just a few months into year 2 of Arknights. Astgenne, meanwhile, released nearly 2 years after that, in July 2022. And those are just the CN dates, so that doesn't even account for how far back Dorothy's Vision got pushed on Global. So, if year 4 operators are on the table, who's next? And hey, now that she's here on Global, that means CN is 6 months ahead. Could a year 5 altar be coming soon? It's impossible to say for sure, but for the first time in a long time, it feels like there's actually reason to speculate on who could be getting an altar next, rather than just whichever launch unit doesn't have one yet. And while I'm certain they won't stop with those, as someone who started playing in year 4 and has very fond memories of getting excited about various operators from that time, this is probably the most excited I've been about altars in ages. But that's going to be it for me. But let me know what you think. Are you building Astgenne, and who do you think should get an altar next? Thanks for watching, and as always, thanks to my members Shali, Apparent Angel, and Lasat, and Auf Wiedersehen.